numbers know no end, brother! What, brother? Avenge me, brother! Brother, avenge me!
In March 2010, we witnessed Kratos destroy Olympus, the entire Greek world, and even himself, though not really, in one of the most epic and awe-inspiring experiences of the PlayStation 3 generation, finally bringing an end to his tale of bloody vengeance that we had experienced over the last 5 years. In November 2010, we witnessed a side quest that has no real bearing on the larger story that has already ended and developed for the previous generation of hardware, so all of that epic scale and gruesome detail is gone. I'm currently playing through the entire Greek saga of God of War and ranking them in my personal order of preference, which is currently looking like this. And in this video, we are going to be looking at the second PSP release for the series, Ghost of Sparta. I kind of feel for everyone involved in making this game. Just a few months prior, fans had experienced the epic conclusion to the franchise and to Kratos' story of revenge in a game that is still graphically impressive to this day on a scale that had never been seen before or arguably since. And then they have to try and get people excited for a PSP game that tells a side story and looks like the old PS2 releases. I think anyone would agree that this must have been a hard sell. I've never owned a PSP, so I didn't play this one on release. I had to wait until it was remastered and re-released on PS3 the following year, but even then I didn't pick it up straight away. For me, the series was done, God of War was over. I always intended to play this eventually, but I was in no rush. But then they packaged it with Chains of Olympus and sold it through the digital store, so I wouldn't even have to put on trousers to go and buy it. I didn't play it straight away though, and according to my old save file, my one playthrough of this game was in 2014. Like I said, I was lacking enthusiasm for the series by this point, and I went into this playthrough remembering nothing about the game, other than Kratos is looking for his brother. The game apparently sold incredibly well though, and within 6 months of release had sold over 1 million copies and had reviewed incredibly well, with most outlets noting how impressive it is that they managed to get a console-like experience packed into a portable release. I can't find too much about the development of this game online, but between what I have found and some lines of dialogue from previous releases, it's clear that while Ready at Dawn developed the game, they were working very closely with Sony Santa Monica to bring this game together, with Cory Barlog even being credited as having written and created the story. In one interview, he even lists this as his favourite release in the series.
And this one, I think this is actually the best one in the whole series. Everything we wanted to do in 2, we actually ended up doing in this one.
Though it should be noted that this was said during press events leading up to the release of Ghost of Sparta, so he's obviously going to say that this is the best one. Ask the internet what it thinks of this game, and it seems to have taken on a bit of a mythical status amongst fans, often cited as one of the best in the series. But are these people right to say that? Well, that's what we're here to answer today, with the only opinion that matters, mine. Be sure to watch the other videos in this series if you want a deeper discussion about the basic mechanics of this game, as all of these releases are, at their core, basically the same thing. There are some new weapons and abilities that we will be getting into and comparing to the rest of the series, and we'll be taking a good look at the story, so consider this your spoiler warning for every game up to this point. You should be safe from any Ascension spoilers though, because I can't remember anything about that game. But before we get into that, I'd just like to take this opportunity to shout out the sponsors of this video, the highest minds in all of Olympus, the Patreon members. These fabulous people have a directly positive impact on the channel, as each membership allows me to care a little bit less about keeping my videos safe enough for YouTube advertisers. On top of that, members can also get these videos up to a week early, and if I have had to make any changes to appease YouTube, then they also get the unedited versions too. There's only a couple of tiers at the moment, as we're still in the larval stage of growth, so if you somehow manage to enjoy the drivel I put out on here and want to support such things, then the Patreon is the most direct way of doing so. Also, just watching, liking, subscribing and sharing this stuff around helps out the channel more than I think people realise, and I am incredibly grateful for everyone who sticks around past the introduction of these things. So with all of those niceties out of the way, let's dive into a side story that has no major impact on the larger narrative. I just want to start with a quick disclaimer. This isn't a review of Ghost of Sparta per se. This is a comparison against the rest of the series and where I personally rank it against those games. The Greek God of War titles are all fundamentally the same game, so if you like one of them, you will like any of the others to some degree. So if you're watching this trying to figure out whether or not this is worth playing, then absolutely yes, it is. Go get it. Just try and get it cheap because it's only 4 or 5 hours long. Like I said, I go into more detail about the core combat, traversal, and puzzle mechanics in the God of War 1 video, and I elaborate them on a bit in the God of War 2 release, so go and check those out if you want a deeper look at just how good the Blades of Chaos / Athena / Exile are, and how agile Kratos is when double jumping around ancient Greece. Just know that the Blades of Athena are still excellent weapons that cater to different styles of combat. The puzzles are still more of a time sink as you slowly move boxes around rather than being anything mentally taxing, and Kratos still gets knocked down about as easily as your mom drops her pants. Seriously, what is wrong with that woman? Ghost of Sparta is set between God of War 1 and 2, with Kratos unwillingly plopped onto the throne of the God of War after trying to top himself when it was revealed that the gods would not allow him to forget his heinous acts of murdering his wife and child. Despite taking the throne, it would appear that Kratos is not yet the true God of War, as he is still plagued by visions of his mortal life, according to the narrator. Though we later learn that these are a sort of mix of visions and memories, as Kratos is seemingly haunted by specific memories from his childhood, along with an old woman calling out to Kratos for help, who appears to be within a temple of Poseidon within the city of Atlantis. Kratos decides that this particular dream is now the most pressing thing on his to-do list, and he sets sail for Atlantis and the opening level that sees us, hang on, let me check this, battle demonic soldiers on a ship during a rainstorm while a giant sea creature tries to kill us at various points. For a moment I thought I'd maybe put the wrong disc in, but no, Ghost of Sparta opens with what I guess could be seen as an homage to the original game. And to be fair, the similarities are only cosmetic. It's not like it copies the first game's opening beat for beat or anything. I do have to wonder if these similar openings are because, at the time, this might have been seen as the last God of War game. I can't find concrete dates as to when development on Ascension began, but looking at the release dates, it's possible that Ghost of Sparta could have been seen as the final game in the series. The main trilogy was done, the story of Kratos has been told and filled out with his PSP games. This could have been seen as the final game, paying homage to the game that started it all. Or maybe they ran out of ideas or something, I don't know, I wasn't there. We get our usual combat tutorials here, and playing this on a PS3 rather than a PSP does take a little bit of adjustment after coming almost straight from the made-for-console games. This game was developed with a more limited controller in mind, so the L2 and R2 buttons are completely useless here. It's also worth noting that this is the first game where we have no reasonable excuse as to why Kratos is starting the game with a limited moveset and no powers. Chains of Olympus was, at the time of this game's release, the earliest game in the series chronologically, so it makes sense that Kratos starts with basic blades and no powers, and at the end of that game we see him get stripped of everything he had acquired. God of War 2 initially starts with Kratos having fully upgraded blades and even a cheeky power brought forward from the first game before draining all of his power into the Blade of Olympus, and we start God of War 3 with fully upgraded blades again before the spirits of the dead strip us of all of our abilities. So what's the deal here? Why can't Kratos spin around really fast anymore? It's worth noting and keeping in mind that Athena speaks to Kratos here and tells him just to leave it, mate, just walk away, she's not worth it. Regularly throughout the game, Kratos is told to stop following this trail, and I feel like the story ultimately ends up contradicting these details, so keep that in mind later and be ready to correct me because I'm very likely wrong on this. I was still struck by how good this game looks though, and it is amazing that this was developed for a handheld device and yet looks better than the games developed for the PS2. I know it's newer tech, but still, it's Diddy and it fits in your pocket. Ready at Dawn created their own engine for the God of War game, so they do have their own distinct visual style, which to my mind looks a little bit more cartoony than the PS2 releases, but there is more detail in the textures and the effects than those PS2 games. Like Kratos getting more blooded as he gets beaten up, and the water effects of crashing waves and water just pouring off everything. Like with Chains of Olympus, it's amazing how much graphical grunt Ready at Dawn managed to squeeze out of this little handheld device. We move through the besieged ship and encounter the tentacles of Scylla, which I'm probably mispronouncing, the giant monster with tentacles for nipples who is trying to sink the ship. We also get these new crab enemies that pull apart pretty easily, and this did get me thinking though. Scylla and these crabs attacking us makes sense because they're sea monsters and we're bobbing around in their neck of the woods, so them getting territorial and attacking us makes sense. But who are these guys? Why are they trying to take us out? They're carrying tridents, so we could assume that they're Atlanteans sent by Poseidon to stop us getting there? But why? We haven't done anything yet. That soon stops mattering though, as Scylla drags the ship onto the rocks and emerges from the sea for our first taste of a boss encounter. By this point in time, God of War was known, amongst other things, for its epically sized and cinematic opening boss fights. The Kraken, the Colossus of Rhodes, or Poseidon himself. Obviously the PSP couldn't handle anything of that scale, but this one was just boring. I know it's not the full and final fight with Scylla, but it just thrashes around a bit before moving about and just sitting there taking hits to the face, watching the crabs do all the work, like your dad on a night in with your mum. I guess the main point of this boss is to teach you how effective blocking is, and I realised here, pretty fucking late into the series, just how effective the block is in these games, and yet by design, we can't take full advantage of it. I've often complained about how easily Kratos can be interrupted by enemy attacks and quickly end up getting stun-locked, but by blocking you can deflect almost every attack possible, whether it be a little sword swipe or a giant tentacle slamming down on your boss. Problem is that you can't cancel attack animations, so if you've started a heavy attack chain and then notice a crab beelining towards your ankles, you can't do anything about it. You just have to watch Kratos get interrupted and have his attack cancelled. I feel like having the block button immediately cancel whatever else Kratos might be doing would significantly improve the combat system across the series, as it would allow you a reasonable way of preventing Kratos from getting stun locked into oblivion so frequently and make for a good balance against his lack of poise. We hurt Scylla enough that it buggers off back into the water, and then we move through the outskirts of Atlantis, solving all the traditional God of War style puzzles and traversal mechanics as we go, and being introduced to a few different enemy types. The level of detail on the enemies in this game is, once again, higher than any of the PS2 games from memory, and I did appreciate the different style of Minotaur here, with them being big hairy brutes rather than the smoother bull type enemies we've seen previously. The increased enemy details seemingly come at the cost of environmental variety though, as like with Chains of Olympus, the environments all look very similar throughout Ghosts of Sparta. The colour palette does change as we progress through different areas, but it's all the same sort of rock and crumbled ruins, just with different coloured filters depending on where you are. This is a shame, especially after coming off the incredibly detailed halls and temples of God of War 3, but I do understand the technical limitations here. This part of the game is where we are introduced to the parry mechanic, which longtime viewers may remember I was a huge fan of in God of War 2. At the moment all we can do is parry, we can't riposte until we upgrade the blades a bit. However, this took me a while to get the hang of because the timing of the parry window just seemed off to me. Now this might be due to the game being developed for a PSP and I'm sat here playing an HD remaster on the PS3 through an old HD TV, so maybe there's a bit of a delay that wouldn't occur on the intended hardware, but my instinct with parrying is to hit the appropriate button just as the enemy is about to hit me, like a split second before impact. With Ghost of Sparta though, I had to press the button just as the enemy was starting to think that maybe swinging their sword is an option that they'd like to weigh up against other potential actions in the near future. It took me some getting used to, and it does work fine once you get the timing down, but my experience with the game made it feel like it was an incredibly generous window of opportunity that went so far towards being accessible that it ended up becoming a hindrance to itself. And another thing, why are these guys attacking civilians? If we are to assume that Poseidon is sending his lads to try and stop us, which seems likely and civilians even scream about this happening as they run away, why are they cutting down innocent Atlanteans for funsies? It's not just here either, it happens later on too, and like with some bits in God of War 3, it feels like the devs forgot that we are exploring places where normal people live, and instead are treating it as if we are moving through an area currently under siege by an invading force. But that's us, we are the invading force. The soldier monsters should be looking after the people in togas. One new mechanic introduced here is the Hyperion Charge, and I absolutely loved this and wished this had been introduced 4 games ago. Kratos will charge an enemy and tackle them to the ground, which itself causes a bit of a shockwave to knock enemies back and give yourself some space, which you'll need as you could then rain down light and heavy attacks onto your pinned foe. We've seen similar attacks in various forms throughout the series before, but for me this was the most satisfying to use. The animations differ between enemy types as well, so you could be slamming down interlocked fists or shoving their entire head into the ground while their friends reevaluate the life choices that led them to this situation. It does lose its functionality when the fights start getting busier, as you can be interrupted by other enemies, but this felt great to use, and I often used it as a fitting close to a combat situation, leaving it for the final enemy to end the fight with a bit of brutal flair. We fight a few more enemies as we brutalise our way through the not yet lost city of Atlantis, and what would a tour of this water-based utopia be without a bit of swimming? There's more swimming sections later on in the story, and it handles and controls in exactly the same way as it always has, but for some reason, on the 5th entry in the series, they decided to make the swimming feel more like Kratos was pouring through thick custard rather than darting through water. Everything is so slow when you're underwater, and in later sections where you have to swim out of the way of hazards, the sluggish movement really starts to become a bigger concern. Nothing insurmountable, but the underwater traversal just felt worse to me here than it has in any of the other games. What happened? No time to worry about that though, we've got a mother to meet. I'm not sure why she's being held inside a temple of Poseidon, but I guess they really wanted to get an Atlantis level in here and just work backwards from that. Anyone who's played the original game may remember that amongst the bounty of unlockable content was a series of videos that served as teasers for potential future games in the series, with my personal favourite being the one where modern military forces discover the corpse of Kronos and the remains of Pandora's temple. Other potential sequel stories were Kratos trying to save his brother who was taken from him during childhood, and the other was to do with Kratos rescuing his mother and for her to reveal that Zeus is his father. In the documentary for God of War 2, Corey Barlog briefly mentions these videos and basically confirms that they aren't canon, they didn't happen, they were just ideas to build on if and when they were granted a sequel. Well, several sequels later, and a combination of those two ideas is what we're going with. Kratos' mother Callisto is being held inside this temple for some reason, and she reveals that Kratos' brother is still alive. I mean, I think so, he is being held in the domain of death, so I don't know if that counts as being alive or not. She tells him that the Temple of Ares in Sparta holds the secret that will lead Kratos to his brother Deimos. She reveals that she had to lie to Kratos about Deimos' fate as their father forbid her from telling him the truth. Callisto tries to tell Kratos who his father is, but while attempting to do so, she transforms into some sort of horrific goblin-looking thing and tries to eat your head, kicking off another boss battle. This is a better fight than the Scylla encounter, to my mind, though I still don't think it was a great fight. Callisto can take a lot of damage, and similar to Scylla and your mom, doesn't move around too much. Occasionally she'll dash at you and trigger a quicktime event that is seemingly required to do several times in order to kill her, and the limited moveset available to us at this early stage in the game makes for a fairly repetitive battle. Kratos eventually adds another notch to the post of family members he has killed, but this one at least thanks him and reiterates that he needs to go back to Sparta to find his brother. Playing through this game, it does feel like they're making efforts to bridge the gap between the versions of Kratos that we got in God of War 1 and 2. I go into more detail about this character change in the God of War 2 video, but it felt to me like they did away with the subtle depression elements of Kratos and instead focused on the rage, which felt a little bit jarring. This game does seem to be attempting to provide an explanation for that, to show us why Kratos had come to resent Olympus as much as he did in God of War 2. It was bad enough that Ares tricked him into killing his family, and then Athena led him on for 10 years of service only to deny him the relief from his nightmares, but now he finds out that his brother is locked up in the domain of death and the other gods have been lying about it, backed up by the narrator regularly reinforcing the anger and anguish that Kratos is going through. I still think the story has some holes, but I appreciate what it does for Kratos' personality when added to the existing narrative. But for now, we need to get to Sparta, which is definitely not an island in the Mediterranean, so we need to get back to the mainland. On our way, we get our first power of the game, the Eye of Atlantis. This shoots electricity out to cause direction-based damage, and can be upgraded to do more damage depending on how quickly you mash the button. This felt like the weaker of the electric powers we've seen in the series so far, and honestly I think the Poseidon Rage power from the first game is still the best. I did come to use this one in tricky situations, but only until I unlocked some of the more powerful abilities that leave this one feeling kinda pointless. On our way out, our buddy Scylla turns up and drags us underwater, spitting us out inside the volcano Methana, which is full of dudes operating corkscrew pumps to help keep the pressure down and prevent a volcanic eruption. With that foreshadowing about as subtle as a sledgehammer to the testicles, we fight our way through the volcano, engaging in a bit of ceiling hanging combat as we do, until we come across the Titan Thera, being held deep within the volcano. Straight away, this is a huge visual improvement over Chains of Olympus, as while that game showed you many titans, they barely even had any texture to them, instead being dark grey titan shapes that didn't do much. Thera though is fully animated and could be easily picked out of a lineup, and I think she becomes canonically the first character to mention any sort of larger plan involving Kratos. In God of War 2, it's revealed that specifically the Titan Gaia has been watching Kratos, knowing that he would lead their kind against Olympus, and this would be the first time that such a thing has been mentioned to Kratos. Kratos is a bit of a dick here, which is saying something for him, but this time it's unreasonably so. Thera asks Kratos to free her, and he tells her bollocks, saying he didn't come here to free her and he doesn't need anything from her. Then why are you here then? Why did you come in this room? You don't know what's going on, mate. And instead of admitting that, you're getting angry and lashing out, kind of like reform voters. Thera tells him that if he doesn't free her, then he will share her fate, but then sweetens the deal by offering him her power in return for releasing her. Now, I say he releases her, but that really wasn't obvious to me at first. Kratos lunges his blades into her belly and absorbs her power into them, which is apparently just what she needed to escape and start collapsing the volcano. What? What happened here? Sorry, how are these two things related? From here onwards throughout this game, I started getting the feeling that the levels were designed first and they just threw any old reason in to justify Kratos being there, and this is one of them. They wanted a volcano level and they needed it to collapse because that's exciting, so they just stuck a Titan in there and have them tear it down. Regardless of the story reasons for it, Kratos can now add the power of flame to his blades, which I thought they had anyway, but I guess not. This allows us to damage armoured enemies, which would normally deflect our attacks. This works off a meter that gradually refills, and you have to hold down the R1 button to get your flame on, and when you hit enemies enough, it tags them with a little molten core thing that will explode after a few seconds. I really enjoyed this mechanic, and once you upgrade it a couple of times, it really helped me get out of tough situations, especially once I unlocked the heavy attack combo with the blades, which sometimes felt like I could do nothing else but that attack and get through the rest of the game. I didn't though, because that would get boring. We fight through the volcano, destroying those corkscrew pumps for no real reason that I can see. I mean, we can climb over this, right? We can double jump for Zeus's sake. The volcano gets more and more unstable as we go, and eventually Scylla pops up one last time before we pull its head onto one of those corkscrews and finish it off. The volcano starts going critical and blows us out and over to the island of Crete, which is here, just so you know. Though the narrator tells us that Atlantis was sinking as the camera lifts over our landing spot, so I'm confused as to whether Atlantis is an island or is part of Crete that broke off during this eruption. Answers on a singed postcard, please. We move through Crete towards the capital city of Heraklion, which has the grey filter applied to the ruined building models, but this is interspersed with fires and extra debris. We also get this scene where, once again, monsters are actively going after the civilians for some reason. Again, we are the invading force here. We have just triggered an eruption that is destroying everything. Why are these guys killing the locals? We also get our first rope section here, and I keep forgetting to bring this up, but I really don't like these sections. They are tedious and boring and seem like a total waste in a game with a Z-axis. You face the enemies one at a time, you can't run away. I just don't think these add any enjoyment to the experience, and to my mind would be better off swapped out entirely just for a zipline or something. Kratos stumbles upon another Athena statue, which are like phone boxes that connect directly to her. And I do love that this one looks like she's ghosting him at first, just watching her Kratos statue on her end ring and pretending she can't hear it. Again, she tells Kratos to leave it, and he responds by destroying the statue, which I guess is the equivalent of slamming the phone down so hard it breaks. We fight through some mines, crush an innocent dude for some reason, and encounter our first Gorgons, who, again, I like the updated designs on these guys, their faces being much more like a monstrous snake than they had been previously. Outside the city of Heraklion, we encounter a dying soldier comforting his incredibly dead friend after some sort of battle. Kratos asks what's happened, and he just says that the gods are angry with them and now they're killing everyone. Again, why? What have these people done? Kratos has been causing all sorts of trouble, so why are these citizens getting murked left and right? Apparently it's a message from the daughter, later revealed to be Erinis, daughter of the god of death Thanatos, who is the chap keeping Deimos captive. Okay, you still with me? I guess that answers why these monsters are spawning in and killing everyone, but I do wonder what the other gods think about this and why they're allowing it to happen. Kratos pushes on into the city and encounters the only spiral staircase in this game as we traverse the city that is crumbling apart around us. We see a familiar face as the Gravedigger shows up. This chap was a huge enigma in the first game, digging a grave that Kratos would climb out of Hades through several hours later, and he hasn't been seen since. Because the internet is now so pervasive, I've passively learned who this chap is supposed to be, but when I first played this more than 10 years ago, I still had no idea what his deal was. I'll get into that one later though. He adds to the list of people telling Kratos to stop going after his brother, threatening that by walking this path he has already prevented himself from finding salvation. Kratos obviously doesn't listen, and we carry on through the city until we encounter these Wraith enemies, and I think this game has convinced me that these are my least favourite enemies in the series, and in this one they have a new attack which I found especially annoying. They can already travel through the floor, rendering them invincible while they do so, and now they can launch an attack through the ground, sometimes from off screen, that will instantly damage you and interrupt your attacks. I've mentioned in previous videos that these games have never quite managed to balance the availability of healing orbs mid-combat, with some games doing better than others. In Ghost of Sparta, I came to realise that bigger enemies tended to drop more health orbs than the smaller ones, and while most smaller enemies will not drop any, those that do will barely heal you at all. This means that I found fights against several larger enemies easier than fights with, say, one big daddy and several little twats buzzing around. And there's an encounter later with 2 Cyclopses and a heap of these screeching twats that can fuck off into orbit. The Wraith's ability to instantly interrupt you with an unblockable or unparryable attack feels like straight up bullshit. And while you can roll out of the way of this, it's hard to know when to do that when the Wraith that's about to do it isn't even on screen. God of War 3 lets you pull these twats out of the ground and give you a bit of control over the battlefield, but this game doesn't give you that option. So these things can get straight in the bin, and then set that bin on fire, then bury the ashes at sea, then burn the sea. Kratos sees a statue which triggers a flashback from his childhood of training with his brother in Sparta, only for some outside force to turn up attacking everyone and the memory ends. We encounter a new armoured enemy which can teleport around a bit, and I never felt like I quite got a handle on how these guys work, instead just rolling in any particular direction and hoping for the best. Kratos leaves Heraklion through the city gates and enters the Mounts of Aronia, which are in the northern Peloponnese, which is here. Maybe they're magical gates, perhaps? Or maybe there's another Crete just outside of Patras or something? Anyway, now we're in the snow level and we get our first glimpse of that daughter the dying soldier mentioned, Erinis, torturing a soldier for your location. We fight through some more mines and seemingly more burning ruins for some reason, and navigating an overly involved sliding box puzzle before we encounter this sort of giant ice dog enemy. We don't see many of these throughout the rest of the game, but as you damage this thing, it will drop big clumps of ice, which if not dealt with will become little dog things that will go straight for your ankles. Luckily, this isn't quite as dangerous as the Cerberus enemies from the older games, as these little fellas won't suddenly turn into giant versions, so that keeps this enemy type as a crowd control challenge without the threat of turning into a total shit show. After some more sluggish swimming in water that must be cold enough to turn Kratos' nipples into daggers, we finally come face to face with Erinis, daughter of Thanatos, and we have a bit of a boss fight. This is a more challenging fight than the previous boss encounters, as she has a unique ability that took me a while to learn and can summon in birds that will peck out your eyes and regularly interrupt your attacks. Like I mentioned in the God of War 3 video, I find it cheap when bosses summon in minions to help them out, but other than that, this part of the boss fight was pretty enjoyable once I learned her attacks. She can be parried pretty reliably, and once I figured out her black hole power, I could mostly avoid taking damage from it. She eventually turns into a giant bird, and you have this little QTE section with you sliding down falling rocks and leaping onto her back, and she launches you into the air for this bit, which to me felt completely unnecessary and drags on for far too long. You end up in free fall trying to catch up to her as she shoots gusts of air at you that will slow you down. You get to her, attack her a couple of times, and then repeat over and over again. This just wasn't at all enjoyable to me. If we just had to catch up to her once, then sure, it wouldn't have bothered me too much, but the repeated approaches very quickly became a bore, but it does eventually end with you both crashing into the earth and Kratos finishing her off, not like that, and taking her black hole type power. This feels very overpowered and became my go-to solution when I was getting overwhelmed for the rest of the game. This glowing orb will track the nearest enemy and pull in everything around it, causing regular damage as it does so. And you can spawn several of them at once, meaning that hit counter will just keep climbing and you can stunlock pretty much any enemy until your magic meter depletes, almost rendering every other ability useless. Narratively, it might have made more sense to put this fight straight after leaving Heraklion to explain how we got to the mainland, but stop worrying about that because for the first time in the series, other than some cutscenes, we are finally seeing Sparta, Kratos' home and a city-state infamous in popular culture for its strict militaristic government and the legendary feats of its warriors. I was lucky enough to visit Sparta a few years ago, annoyingly just missing Gerard Butler carrying the Olympic torch through the streets for a bit.
This is Sparta!
Kratos finally returns home and walks the streets to admiration from his people. Well, it sounds like admiration, but I guess they couldn't animate that, so the general populace are actually surprisingly indifferent to one of their own who took the throne of a god now walking amongst them. Most of them, apparently, it's just Tuesday. Except of course for the ladies at the brothel. They are very pleased to see Kratos, and we get to experience what I believe to be the final sex minigame of the entire franchise, and to my mind the most over the top one. Talk about going out with a bang. Previous games have had Kratos entertaining a mere 2 ladies at once, except for in 3 where he shagged the goddess of love herself while her concubines watched in awe. This time though, Kratos seemingly plows through half the female population of Sparta, making me think that Spartan beds must be some of the most sturdy constructions in the ancient world. After that quick orgy, Kratos then starts thinking about his brother as a child, which is worrying, and we play out the memory of them training with each other. Like the falling bit in that last boss fight, this section just went on for way too long and was just boring to me. Look at the scale of the fights we've had up to this point, and then look at this grey 2D encounter with no variety and being forced to go through it several times. I don't see what this achieves over just having a cutscene instead. We eventually get one of those too, as it is revealed that it was Ares and Athena who took Deimos away, with Athena stopping Ares from killing Kratos outright. The narrator tells us that after the Titan War, the Oracle had prophesied that Olympus would be destroyed by a marked warrior, and that whoever controlled that mortal would control the fate of Olympus. Zeus has sent these two to get Deimos, who has a birthmark that resembles Kratos' tattoos. Athena convinces Ares to spare Kratos, she apologizes, and then we drop back to the present day with Kratos stood outside his childhood home. This vision comes up again later and left me with some important questions relating to the events of other games, but we'll get to that. This next section felt very out of place and like it was just added in to extend the playtime. Remember, we have come to Sparta to visit the Temple of Ares to learn the location of Deimos, yet for some reason we have time to stop for an orgy and then fight our way through the underground Spartan jails and kill a giant lion in another little boss fight. And this is a filler boss fight on top of it. It feels like fighting any other big enemy, it just takes more hits before it dies. We emerge from the other side of the jail, fight through more mountains and mine areas before finally arriving at the foot of the Temple of Ares, and I really appreciated the detail of the Spartans tearing down the Ares statue. An information point tells us that most Spartans are ecstatic that one of their own has ascended to godhood, though there are still some Ares devotees that are loyal to the now dead god of war. It's just a cool little bit of world building that we actually get to see in action. At the back of the temple, Kratos gets another vision, I guess, of his younger self leaping out of a reflective wall and beating the shit out of him. We have to throw Jimmy Hopkins against the wall in 4 different places to shatter it and reveal the skull of Keres, I guess, the key that unlocks the door to the domain of death, located within the city of Atlantis, which we just sunk.
Oh, whoops. Whoopsie.
I did notice something during this fight, that it felt like I was hitting the QTE prompts on time, but the game was making me fail. At first, this was a bit annoying, but I thought maybe this was something to do with the input delay, similar to the parry mechanic, but this happened so regularly during this fight that I started to wonder whether it was intentional, that it's supposed to be symbolic of Kratos struggling with the mere concept of fighting his younger self. Or something deep like that I'm not media literate enough to understand. Anyway, we head outside and this chap, who I think is supposed to be the last Spartan for God of War 2, but I'm not sure, hands us a new weapon, the Arms of Sparta. I had forgotten all about this weapon, and having played Ragnarok again at the end of last year, I was pretty excited to get my hands on a spear and shield combo again. I've also just played through Demon Souls for the first time, so I was well versed in hiding behind a shield and jabbing monsters with a sharp metal implement. Unfortunately though, this weapon combo never felt as satisfying as I had hoped. Kratos doesn't even jab with it, instead taking huge swings to take out multiple enemies at once, and the heavy attack sees him slam the shield into people's faces. The shield is required to progress through certain sections as it allows you to move while blocking, and the spear acts as your ranged attack for this game, meaning we no longer have to rely on refillable meters to take out dickheads who hide in the distance. I kept hoping that each weapon upgrade would make the Arms of Sparta feel as epic as I felt it should, but it just never felt that satisfying to me. It's not a bad weapon though, and it's better than the extra weapons we got in God of War 2, but I still think the Gauntlet of Zeus is the best secondary weapon so far, and this just can't compete with it. To add insult to injury, you lose this weapon for the final fight, so all of those upgrade points you plunged into this are wasted for the climactic battle of the game, leaving me feeling shortchanged when I was left with a handful of half upgraded powers for the fight against Death himself. I know I'm kind of skipping over entire levels at this point, but like with Chains of Olympus, the levels here are generally standard fare for the series, and the only real difference between them is the general colour palette on display. Kratos is now heading back to Atlantis to get to the Domain of Death, and on his way through some caves we bump into King Midas, that chap what turns things to gold when he touches them. Since I was a kid, I was that annoying twat that asked too many questions about things, like how does he get dressed?
Did you feed and dress yourself this morning? I didn't. I met a man on the bus today. I shook his hand. He'll never see his family again.
Much like the ancient Greek myths, Kratos doesn't even entertain such stupid questions and instead decides to utilize this ability to freeze the lava blocking his way. I did quite enjoy this whole Midas bit, as we see the king in an almost feral state, driven mad by his foolish and poorly worded wish. I appreciate the little touches here as well, like following patches of gold rock where he's been dragging himself along the walls and having Kratos launch him into the waterfall of lava, or lava fall, I guess, and him freezing in the splash position for all eternity. King Midas was one of the few details I remembered about this game, and while it's relatively short and arguably just a filler section, I appreciated the presentation of this whole section. After fighting through more caves and or mines, we find ourselves on a boat heading towards the now sunken city of Atlantis, and this is another particularly memorable set piece moment. We've already had a fight on a boat during a storm, we started the game with one, but this one has the boat struggling against a cyclone while a metric fuckton of enemies try to end your existence. It just ramps up the drama compared to the opening, and obviously this time we also have more weapons and powers that we've been upgrading, so the fight can get much busier and much more hectic as you slaughter your way through, I assume, the armies of Atlantis while the ship's crew struggle to keep the boat afloat. I forgot to mention we also got a new power before this bit, the Horn of Boreas. Mechanically, this is almost a straight replacement for the Gorgon heads we had in God of War 1 and 2, except this time it freezes enemies for a bit and you swing the horn around your head so you hit enemies while you're freezing them. I found myself using this much more than the Gorgon heads because it's area of effect rather than a targeted attack, but because we get this after the Scourge of Erinis, I barely felt the need to use this new power over that one. Having overpowered abilities is one thing, but at least save the most powerful for last so that we actually use the others for a bit. This felt less effective than the power I already had, so why would I use this one? Kratos gets dragged into the cyclone and lands amongst the ruins of Atlantis, where a statue of Poseidon gives him a bit of a bollocking and finally adds context to that line from God of War 3.
Atlantis will be avenged!
With this being the sunken ruins of Atlantis, we can expect quite a bit more of that sluggish swimming, except now it's timed sections to instant death traps, which is fun. We eventually get another cutscene with Athena, where it is revealed that it was her and Ares who took Deimos that day, which is presented as a reveal but seemed pretty fucking obvious in that cutscene we saw an hour ago, but now Kratos finally catches up and uses this as further reason to be pissed off at Athena. There's a little detail here which irked me a bit though, and it's when Athena tells Kratos that there is more going on than he knows. She says that Deimos had to be dealt with as he was a threat, which tracks with the prophecy of the Marked Warrior destroying Olympus. But she says that Kratos had to live, that she was there to make sure that he was saved. So what does she know about Kratos' future? Did she know back then that she would need Kratos to kill Ares? My first thought was that she knew that she would ascend to a higher state of being eventually, which would then convince her that Olympus actually does need to be destroyed. But that doesn't really seem to track with anything else. The Ares bit kinda makes sense, but then I have to wonder how she could have known about that, but not about what Kratos would do afterwards. I don't know, to me this feels like they wanted to allude to some bigger mystery playing out, but at this point we've seen so much of the story and none of it really fits in with what she's saying here, so it ends up being more confusing than anything else. Or maybe I'm just a dumb shit and missed the obvious reference. Let me know in the comments. Rather than just skipping over the entirety of Atlantis by dismissing it as nothing but more standard fight scenes and lever pulling, I do want to sit for a while and explore that level structure a bit. This occurs throughout this game, with most areas boiling down to light exploration and fight arenas with maybe a bit of box pushing thrown in. There are frequent save points throughout this game, and the longest time I had between these was about 15 minutes, and that was after I died several times because I was pissing about. It's important to remember that this was developed as a game for a handheld device, which back in the olden days were marketed towards people looking for something to do during their commute. Smartphones weren't quite what they are now. We couldn't get San Andreas on our iPhones in 2010, so handheld consoles like the PSP and later the Vita were offering bite-sized chunks of gameplay comparable to what you might expect on a home console. More frequent save points were designed with brief playtimes in mind, as you may only have 20 minutes or so on your bus journey, and the game was designed with this sort of time constraint in mind. When looking from that perspective, it's at least more understanding as to why each little chunk of Ghost of Sparta can start to feel repetitive and familiar. You want to play God of War for 15 minutes, so they give you a vertical slice of the traditional God of War experience within that time frame. Except for the Sparta bit, obviously. Imagine playing that on the bus and trying to explain it to the granny looking over your shoulder. So while I sit at home playing this on my big TV for several hours straight, this is naturally going to feel more repetitive and samey because I've just gone through this pattern 18 times already. But this is not the intended experience for this title. So while I understand why the game was feeling rather monotonous, it still doesn't stop it feeling that way for me. The fact is, I can play this at home all day long, and all the levels do start to blur together because of how similar they all are. I can understand why someone is kicking me in the bollocks, but that doesn't mean I have to appreciate and enjoy it for what it is. Unless that happens to be my kink, in which case I'd probably be encouraging it and asking for more, but that doesn't really work with this metaphor, and now I've distracted myself. Anyway, we fight, climb and swim our way through the ruins of Atlantis until we reach the door to the domain of death, and it's never explained why the door to this place, that apparently even the gods don't go to, is in Atlantis. Apparently this realm is older than even the Titans, which means they found this door that they wouldn't dare walk through and decided to build an entire city around it and almost turn it into some sort of feature. Weird. The Domain of Death features several root-like obstacles that you have to burn away as they swipe at you, but other than that, the level architecture is the same that we've been seeing throughout the game. There is that one fight here though that I mentioned earlier that could fuck off into the primordial chaos from whence it came, where you fight against several Cyclopses and those Wraiths. I didn't die during this one, but fuck me, it gets infuriating. A persistent problem in the series since the first game is when there are multiple enemies on screen, Kratos will often try and grab some other enemy rather than the one with the glowing circle icon above it. So you'll be trying to cinematically execute a Wraith, but Kratos will try to grab the ankle of the nearby Cyclops instead, which will obviously fail and leave him open to attack and potentially getting stun locked. Like I say, this has been a problem since the first game, but it was only that first game and now Ghost of Sparta that this was annoying enough for me to really notice during my playthrough. But then each release has overly difficult fight sequences leading up to the end of the game, and when compared to the others, this one was probably the easiest. This just sticks out as probably the most difficult non-boss fight of this game for me. After breaking through a firewall and fighting some skeletons, we finally find ourselves face to face with Deimos. suspended in the air in a chamber looking out across the eternal void of the domain of death. Deimos is not happy to see Kratos, seemingly annoyed that his brother took so long to break into the realm that not even the gods dare to enter to save him. Seems unreasonable to me, but then I've never spent 20 years or so suspended from the ceiling, so what do I know? Almost without hesitation, Deimos tries to kill Kratos, displaying a surprising amount of strength for a guy who has been hung up by his arms for most of his life. It gets to the point where he is seemingly about to kill Kratos, then Thanatos steps in and drags him away to finish him off and flies him down into a thick fog. Kratos stumbles after them, and we find ourselves back at the cliffs where Kratos tried to top himself at the start and end of the first game, and where he lands when he falls out of Helios' chariot in Chains of Olympus. I'm not sure why Ready at Dawn keep bringing us back to this spot, other than it is seemingly the front door to Olympus, but repeatedly coming back here doesn't really do anything narratively, instead feeling more like someone hoping we get excited at seeing familiar locations. Thanatos leaves Deimos dangling from a cliff, who then calls out to Kratos to save him, at which point I'm thinking, fuck you mate, you would have killed me then if that goth twat didn't turn up and stop you. Oh, now you want help? Do you know how much I've been through today trying to save you? I sunk a city, I threw myself through a magic wall, I caught so many STIs I can barely walk. Then when you do save him, suddenly he's all buddy-buddy and making references to their childhood like they've been pals this whole time, and Kratos then gives him the spear and shield I've pumped all that blood into over the last couple of hours. Fuck Deimos, man, should've left him hanging there, the ungrateful bitch. As hilarious an ending that would have made, it would have been a bit of a letdown to not have some sort of battle against death itself. We have a quick chat about fate, with Thanatos mentioning that Kratos is just a pawn in a game that he doesn't even know is being played, so now I'm again wondering what he's talking about. Is he talking about Kratos rescuing the Titans, like Thera knew he would? Is he talking about destroying Olympus, or whatever Athena will eventually try to do? What does he know here? We don't get time to ask such questions as Thanatos attacks and we kick off a perfectly functional boss fight. It's nothing spectacular, but it's not a bad boss fight by any means. We get a meter which when filled can order Deimos to throw a spear at Thanatos, but outside of scripted animations this didn't seem to really do anything. This does get a bit repetitive as we keep fighting and causing damage until the same animations trigger several times, and then Thanatos turns into a huge dragon thing and we have to keep bashing his arm until he goes small again and the cycle begins anew. I know it's not really fair to compare the visuals of this game to God of War 3, but after experiencing the spectacle and scale of that game, it is a bit of a compromise to go back to older tech and less awe-inspiring set-piece battles. Anyway, eventually Thanatos manages to kill Deimos, which Kratos is not happy about at all. Kratos then goes Super Saiyan and is engulfed by flame as he proceeds to beat the god of death to death in a manner very reminiscent of the beatdown Poseidon gets in God of War 3, just without the first person viewpoint. This does make me wonder how people die now though. In actual Greek myths, Thanatos gets chained up by Sisyphus and Ares frees him when he gets fed up of people not being able to kill each other. God of War 3 establishes that each god's death has a direct impact on the world in some way, so killing death seems like they need to get a replacement in ASAP before overpopulation becomes a big problem. Kratos carries the corpse of his brother to the top of the cliff, where the gravedigger has a freshly dug grave for him. Kratos then goes to top himself, just like the end of the first game, before stepping back to bemoan what he has become. The gravedigger remarks that he has become death, destroyer of worlds, coining the phrase thousands of years before Oppenheimer got the chance. Athena then shows up and tells Kratos that he has now let go of the last thing tying him to the mortal world so that he can now truly become an Olympian. Kratos interrupts whatever it is she's about to do and swears the gods will pay for this before cutting to credits. So now I'm confused again, because this whole time Athena has been telling Kratos to abandon this quest, but now she's saying that by having gotten closure on that, he can now become a god. I guess he could have just accepted that his brother was trapped somewhere and there was nothing he can do about it, but Kratos spent 10 years serving Athena to get her to remove his nightmares, so she should know that he's not one to forget about and move on from his past. I don't know, the story just seems like a bit of a mess, like they kept forgetting what the overarching story was, both within the existing series as a whole and even within this game itself. After the credits, we see the gravedigger burying Kratos' mum and that he has dug a third grave, which I assume is meant for Kratos, though we already know how the story ends, so this feels like a cliffhanger for absolutely nothing. We aren't given any answers as to who the Gravedigger is, but the internet seems convinced it's Zeus, and other than the two having the same voice actor in the first game, I don't see any evidence to support this. Apparently you can unlock the Gravedigger as a playable character in the bonus arena mode for this game, and when doing so he will reveal that his true form is none other than Zeus, which seems to be enough to convince people that he has always been Zeus. Thing is, him being Zeus doesn't answer any questions and instead presents others and kind of contradicts the existing story. I'm not convinced that this guy is Zeus because again, that has no impact on the narrative and that sort of revelation should be a big deal or should at least recontextualize his past appearances. I wonder instead if the Gravedigger turning into Zeus in an optional mode in a spin-off title designed for a niche device wasn't actually just a bit of a funny Easter egg for enthusiastic players, rather than some sort of groundbreaking reveal for the larger series. So now I have to figure out where I'm going to put this in my ranking. I enjoyed Ghost of Sparta as a whole because it's a God of War game and I enjoy those, and I feel confident in saying that fans of any of these Greek games will enjoy this one too. Like with Chains of Olympus, I don't think the story really adds anything to the main narrative of the series, other than clarifying a couple of comments by Poseidon and Zeus in God of War 3. This is another solid adventure with Kratos, and it does feature more memorable set pieces and vistas than Chains of Olympus, or at least I certainly remembered more about this game than I did the older one. That said though, the weapons and powers in this game felt very mediocre to me, and the bosses all seemed perfectly functional but hardly ever enjoyable. Various story beats seem to contradict or just not fit with existing story elements, and I found myself often wondering why we are exploring certain areas at all, other than to arbitrarily extend the gameplay. In my mind, there's not even a consideration about this game getting into the top 3. It just can't, and there's a discussion to be had about whether it's even fair to rank the handheld games alongside the home console releases. So really, the question is, do I prefer this game over Chains of Olympus? And honestly, against my expectation, I have to say no. I prefer Chains of Olympus. Honestly, I think both of these games are roughly of equal quality, there's just more of it in Ghost of Sparta. In both games, the levels and their structures are so familiar that I struggle to pick out one location from another, the gameplay loop between save points is fairly repetitive, and none of the powers or new weapons really stand out, except for the Gauntlet of Zeus. That thing felt epic to use, and to my mind was more fun than anything in God of War 2 or 3, even the Nemean Cestus didn't feel as good to use as this. I also really enjoyed the Charon fight in Chains and still look back on it fondly, which I just can't do with any of the bosses from Ghost of Sparta. Bits of the Erinis fight were good fun, but only parts of it. So yeah, in a move I'm sure will cause many people to get irrationally angry at me, Ghost of Sparta currently sits at the bottom in 5th place. That doesn't mean it's not good though, I just don't think it's as good as the other games. It's surprising to me that this game frequently gets placed highly on other ranking lists, and I seem to remember having a higher opinion of this game when I first played it. I do wonder if that has something to do with the low expectations set by it being a port of a PSP game. For the most part, this feels like a full home console release, and looking back at reviews from the time, this is one of the most common praises of the game. Could it be that people go into this game expecting very little and are therefore taken completely by surprise as to just how good it is? I certainly feel like that's what's happened to me when I first played it, but then that might also mean that I was subconsciously expecting greater things from this game because of all the praise it gets, and was therefore disappointed. Nothing's ever simple, is it? Which leaves me with only one more game to add to the ranking list, that being God of War Ascension, the game whose announcement I remember being met with a resounding, really? Another one? From many people. We didn't know we wanted it, but they gave it to us anyway. All I can remember about it is a giant monster with several arms, and I think there's a level on a huge mechanical snake or something. I'm not sure, so make sure to subscribe to the channel so we can rediscover the end of an era together when that video comes out. Thank you so much for taking time out of your existence to listen to my drivel, it really is appreciated. And be sure to check out my other God of War videos if you haven't already, and I've also done a ranking series for the Assassin's Creed and Far Cry games. I also did the Rage games, but there's only 2 of them, so that's not much of a series. As well as God of War, I'm also currently working my way through the Halo series for the first time ever and ranking them as I go, so be sure to check that out if sci-fi shooters are more your thing. I'm also creeping up on the end of that series, so let me know in the comments which series you'd like me to rank next. Once again, a massive, gargantuan thank you and shout out to the Patreon members. YouTube seems to be getting increasingly touchy with what you can and can't say or show in videos, so Patreon is the most direct and impactful way that you can support the channel and allow me to worry less about censoring my content to appease faceless advertisers. In return for their incredible support, Patreon members get publicly praised like this and can also get access to videos usually about a week before they go up on YouTube. It's a small community at the moment, but as we grow, we can start looking at different tiers and new rewards for all those fantastically generous people. Of course, the world is currently crumbling around us, so if you're not able to join the Patreon, then honestly, just watching this far into the video is an amazing help for the continued growth of the channel, along with dropping a comment, liking it, or hell, even going above and beyond and sharing it somewhere helps more than I think people realize, and I am incredibly grateful to everyone who can help in whatever way possible. The next video I'm working on is Halo 4, so watch out for that, but if that's not your thing, I'll see you back here for God of War Ascension. But until then, I managed to get Morrowind in a Steam sale, so I want to go see what all the fuss is about over there.